we're always, trying to track the big changes happening around the world.
Right.
Trying to figure out where the real shifts are, the ones that are really going to reshape things.
Yeah.
And honestly, the iron and steel sector in India, it's been making a lot of noise lately.
A lot of noise, yeah.
I mean, you've probably seen the headlines, right? Everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
There's this feeling that India is really on the verge of becoming a major player in this industry.
Yeah, a powerhouse.
Especially with China's growth starting to, cool off a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's exactly what we're going to dig into in this deep dive, right?
Right.
Can India really step up and become the next steel titan? I mean, that's the big question.
It's a huge question.
And it's not just about, India itself.
Right.
This has implications for the entire global market.
Right.
I mean, if India really ramps up production,
Mm-hmm.
they could become a swing producer, the one that really influences prices and trade flow.
The way China has for so long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've done a ton of research on this, brought together a lot of information from different sources.
Yeah, we've synthesized it all for you.
And we're going to focus on two main areas.
Two key areas.
First, we'll really dissect India's, it's an impressive surge in steel production, right?
Uh-huh.
But we're going beyond just the numbers, okay?
Yeah.
We want to figure out how strong this growth really is.
Right, the underlying strength.
And whether it can actually last.
Sustainability, yeah.
Okay. And then second, we're going to dive into what's happening with India's mining sector.
Crucial.
Because as we all know, that's the foundation for all of this, right?
The bedrock, literally.
You can't make steel without the raw materials.
You can't.
And India's putting a lot of effort into, rebuilding and modernizing that sector.
It's undergoing a transformation, really.
To really get a handle on this whole thing, we're going to look at it from a couple of different angles.
Multiple perspectives. It's important.
So first, we're going to put on our policy hats, right? Think about the big picture, the long-term sustainability, all the strategic challenges India is facing.
On a macro view.
But then we're also going to get down into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
Look at the industry itself, what's actually happening on the ground.
Uh-huh.
Talk to the people who are actually making this growth happen.
Get their insights.
So by the end of this deep dive,
Yeah.
we want to be able to answer a few key questions for you.
For our listeners, yeah.
First off, is India's goal of, becoming a steel superpower?
Yeah.
Is it even realistic?
That's $1 million question.
And if it is, what are the crucial things in the mining industry that'll either make it happen or, totally hold them back?
What are the make or break factors, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump right in and talk about this growth, okay?
Okay.
India is now the #2 steel producer in the world.
It's incredible.
It's a huge jump, right?
It is. It's remarkable.
We're only behind China now.
Yeah, and they've surpassed a lot of established players.
A lot, yeah.
I mean, we're talking a production capacity over 150 million metric tons.
That's massive.
It is.
And geographically, it's interesting, right?
It is, yeah.
You've got these real industrial hubs emerging in states like Odisha,
Uh-huh.
Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand.
Right.
These are the powerhouses.
They are, yeah.
The sheer scale of it is pretty mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing, yeah.
But here's the thing, right?
Okay.
Growth is great, but can they keep?
The question of sustainability.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the key question, right?
Right.
Our sources, some of them are raising concerns about the infrastructure, the stuff that's needed to support this massive expansion.
The foundations, the support system.
Yeah, can it handle it?
That's the question.
Think about it. The logistics alone are a huge challenge.
They are, yeah.
You've got to move these massive quantities of raw materials.
Right.
And then the finished steel products.
Yeah.
Can the rail network actually handle that?
Capacity is a big issue.
Then there's the energy side of things.
Right.
You need a reliable supply of coal
Absolutely.
to power all of these steel plants.
And that's not always a given in India.
Not always.
There can be inconsistencies, yeah.
And maybe even more important in the long run is
Uh-huh.
the investment in research and development, right?
Absolutely crucial.
Because if India wants to stay competitive,
Mm-hmm.
they've got to keep innovating.
They do.
They can't just rely on what they're doing now.
And that takes consistent investment.
And that's where the comparison to China comes in, right?
Right.
When China was going through its steel boom,
Yeah.
they built this incredible logistics network
Extensive. Real.
alongside their industrial expansion.
Yeah, a very integrated approach.
Everything worked together.
Yeah.
India's infrastructure, it's still catching up.
Still playing catch up. Yeah.
And our sources, some of them are saying that these bottlenecks
These limitations.
could really derail the momentum.
It's a valid concern.
It's something to watch closely. But, it seems like the industry is aware of these potential problem.
Oh, they are?
And they're doing something about it.
It seems so, yeah.
I mean, the government has committed a lot of money.
Yeah, a substantial amount.
Something like $1.4 billion towards digitizing the mining sector.
Wow, that's a big commitment.
It's part of their 2023 National Steel Policy.
Interesting. So a policy-driven initiative.
And we're also seeing private companies going after these captive mines, right?
A captive mines, meaning mines they own themselves.
Exactly. So they're not relying on outside suppliers.
Right. It's a way to control their own supply chain.
And they're bidding pretty aggressively for.
It's a competitive landscape.
So this doesn't feel like they're just reacting to problems.
No.
It feels like a strategic move, right?
Yeah, a calculated strategy.
Trying to get ahead of the game.
Exact.
It's interesting, this two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Digitizing things on the one hand,
Yeah.
securing these captive mines on the other. It's all about creating a more stable supply of raw materials, right?
Yeah. And potentially making it more cost-effective as well.
But then there's this other issue that comes up, right?
Okay.
We've got to talk about coking coal.
The elephant in the room.
Because India still imports a lot of it, particularly from Australia.
They do, yeah.
And that raises questions about how self-reliant they really are, right?
It does.
I mean, if they can't produce all the coking coal they need,
Yeah.
they're still dependent on other countries.
On global supply chains.
Which means they're vulnerable, right?
Vulnerable to price fluctuations, geopolitical risks, all sorts of things.
So until they can tap into their own domestic reserves more effectively
Uh-huh.
and reduce those imports,
Hmm.
that goal of being truly self-sufficient,
Yeah.
it remains just that, a goal.
An aspiration.
So taking all of that into account, what does it tell us about the strength of India's steel sector right now?
It's a tough question.
I mean, they're clearly growing, right?
Yeah, the growth is undeniable.
But they're still pretty connected to these global supply chains.
And that creates vulnerabilities.
It does.
It's a balancing act.
It is.
They need to strengthen those foundations.
So let's move on and talk about the mining industry itself, because
Okay.
it seems like there's a real transformation happening there.
Yeah, a real shift.
I mean, the picture we're getting from our sources is that the past was all about these slow auctions, old lease agreements that just kept hanging around,
Yeah, a lot of legacy issues.
and a ton of environmental red tape.
A lot of bureaucracy, yeah.
But now it's all about rebuilding.
Rebuilding and modernizing.
They've got these new amendments to the, the Mines and Minerals Act?
Yeah, the MMBR Act.
MMGR Act, right?
That's the one.
So they're streamlining the approvals process.
Cutting through the red tape.
And they're even using digital technology to track minerals.
Digitization is a big part of it.
I mean, that's a pretty huge change, right?
It is. It's a real paradigm shift.
Like a light bulb moment.
Yeah. Yeah, an aha moment for sure.
It seems like they're really trying to modernize.
Yeah, bring things into the 21st century.
But of course, there are always different perspectives.
Right.
So some of our sources are raising questions about this new auction system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's supposed to make things more transparent.
More open and fair, yeah.
But is it really benefiting everyone?
That's the question.
Because mining is expensive, right?
Very capital intensive.
So the worry is that this new system might actually favor the big corporations.
The ones with deep pockets.
And potentially squeeze out the smaller players.
The SMEs.
Yeah, make it harder for them to.
It's a valid concern, yeah.
So that brings us to the issue of consolidation, right?
Uh-huh.
Because a lot of people in the industry argue that to really succeed globally,
To compete on a global scale.
you need to be big.
Scales everything.
And they point to companies like JSW Steel
Right.
as a prime example
Yeah. They're often cited as a model.
because they're vertically integrated.
Right. Yeah, they control everything in-house.
From mining the ore to refining it
Mm-hmm.
to making the finished steel products.
A very efficient model.
So the argument is that this kind of scale,
This level of integration.
it allows for greater efficiency,
Uh-huh.
better cost control.
And more investment in technology.
But here's the thing, right?
Uh,
We can't just ignore the environmental side of all of this.
Absolutely not.
The ESG stuff, it's crucial.
It's non-negotiable.
And our sources, a lot of them are emphasizing.
That's a recurring theme.
I mean, this push for growth, this consolidation.
Yeah.
It can't come at the expense of the environment.
It can't.
It's got to be done sustainably.
Sustainably and responsibly.
Otherwise, you're risking serious ecological damage.
Irreversible damage, yeah.
And it goes against everything India has committed to.
In terms of climate change?
So as we're seeing this reshaping of the mining industry,
Yeah.
it really highlights this tension.
This tension between growth and responsibility. It's a balancing act.
You want the growth,
Yeah.
but you can't destroy the environment in the process.
It's a tough needle to thread,
It is.
but it's essential.
So now let's zoom out a bit.
Okay.
Look at the global picture.
The global context.
Because India's situation is pretty unique when you compare it to other big steel producers.
It is, yeah.
Like we talked about earlier, China's growth is flattening out.
It's plateauing, yeah.
Partly because of oversupply and partly because of environmental pressures.
Where they're facing increasing scrutiny.
And then you've got Europe, where they're shifting more towards this scrap-based steel production.
Yeah, using electric arc furnaces.
Which is a whole different ballgame.
A different approach altogether.
But India, it's a different story.
Yeah.
Their domestic demand is actually growing.
It's surging.
And it's being driven by all this infrastructure development.
All the new housing, roads, railways.
And our sources are saying this is just the beginning.
Just the tip of the iceberg.
So that's a pretty significant sign for the future, right?
It is, yeah.
I mean, it suggests there's a lot more potential for growth.
A lot of room to run.
But it also presents India with a big strategic choice.
A fork in the road.
What path are they going to take?
Right.
Do they try to maximize volume?
Like China did?
Basically try to outproduce everyone else?
Become the volume leader?
Or do they focus on higher value-added products?
More specialized, higher margin steel.
Kind of like Germany.
Yeah, a quality over quantity approach.
And then there's this other exciting possibility, right?
Uh-huh.
What about green steel?
Ah, yes, the green revolution.
I mean, India has a ton of potential for solar and hydrogen energy.
They do, yeah.
So could they become a leader in that area?
It's certainly possible.
But that would require a real focus on innovation, right?
Absolutely.
And investment in these new technologies.
Yeah, they have to be aggressive about it.
And it's not just talk, right?
No.
We're already seeing some concrete steps in that direction.
Some real-world example.
Like those pilot projects at Jindal's plants, where they're exploring hydrogen-based direct-reduced iron.
That's a big step forward.
And then there's the steel scrap recycling policy.
Yeah, that's a key initiative.
It's all about promoting the use of recycled steel.
A circular economy approach.
So it feels like they're not just waiting around, right?
No, they're being proactive.
But the challenge, and I think this is the really big one,
Okay.
is that they're trying to do all of these things at the same time.
That's a lot to juggle.
Control costs, modernize the mines, go green.
Yeah, it's a complex equation.
Our sources describe it as walking a high wire without a safety net.
That's a good analogy.
It's risky.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick, right,
Okay.
which path do you think makes the most sense for India?
That's a tough guy.
Volume or value? Conventional steel or green steel?
Right.
What's going to position them best for the future?
Well, if they go all in on volume,
Yeah.
they might grab a big chunk of the market.
Especially in developing economy.
Yeah, where price is a major factor
But that could also lead to oversupply.
and exacerbate environmental problems.
Right. So it's not a simple win.
No.
But if they focus on value and green steel,
Yeah.
they could command higher prices.
Higher margins,
And it's a more sustainable approach.
environmentally speaking,
But it requires a lot of investment.
and a commitment to innovation.
So it's a trade-off.
It is
But honestly, I think the best approach is probably a mix.
a hybrid approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Capitalize on that domestic demand for conventional steel.
Keep the momentum going.
But at the same time, really push hard on the green steel front.
Invest in R&D, build the infrastructure.
Because that's where the future lies.
Right. In the long run.
Yeah. Okay, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about some of the predictions we've come across.
Okay, predictions for the future.
Yeah, specifically for 2030.
Looking ahead.
One of our sources, Ravi Nay, he predicted that India is going to become the top steel exporter to Africa and Southeast.
Wow, that's ambitious.
And that they'll dominate that mid-tier infrastructure-grade steel market.
Interesting.
What do you think about that?
It's not impossible.
No.
I mean, India's getting more and more cost competitive.
Right.
And their production capacity is expanding rapidly.
So they're in a good position.
They are, yeah.
Especially with all the infrastructure projects happening in those regions.
Yeah, there's a lot of demand.
But it's not a sure thing, right?
No.
They've got to maintain quality.
Consistency is key.
And they've got to navigate these complex trade relations.
Geopolitics always plays a role.
And they've got competition.
Other countries are vying for those markets.
So it's not going to be easy.
It's a challenge.
Another source, Mira, she predicted something even bolder.
Okay, even bolder.
She thinks that by 2030,
Uh-huh.
India's going to be leading the way on green mining protocols.
Wow.
Setting a new global standard for sustainable iron ore extraction.
That's a lofty goal.
It is.
But it would be a game changer.
If they can pull it off. Because it would mean they're not just producing steel sustainably.
Yeah.
They're actually extracting the raw materials sustainably, too.
The whole supply chain is green.
And that could give them a real competitive edge.
A real differentiator in the global market.
Well, let's be realistic, right?
Okay.
There are also challenges, potential roadblocks.
Yeah, always.
Ravi, he highlighted the risk of policy flip-flops.
Right.
Because if the government keeps changing the rules,
The incentives, the regulations,
it creates a lot of uncertainty.
it makes it hard for businesses to plan.
And that scares off investors,
Absolutely.
which is a big problem because this industry needs a ton of investment.
It's capital intensive.
Mira, she pointed to a different challenge,
Okay.
water scarcity.
A growing concern,
And it's getting worse because of climate change.
exacerbated by climate change. Yeah.
And both mining and steel production use a lot of water.
They're water-intensive processes.
So if there's not enough water,
It could cripple the industry.
so of all these predictions and challenges, what stands out to you the most?
What resonates?
What do you think is the most likely outcome?
Or the biggest hurdle they have to overcome?
Hmm.
You know, for me, it's that balancing act.
Oh, cool.
Trying to grow rapidly
Yeah,
while still being environmentally responsible.
especially with climate change.
Yeah, that's the real test.
Because it's easy to say you're going to be green,
Right. It's easy to make promises
but actually doing it
in a way that's scalable and sustainable.
while still meeting all that demand for steel.
That's the hard part.
And then you add in the water scarcity issue.
Right.
It's a tough situation.
It's a complex challenge.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think it's clear that India is at a crossroads.
A pivotal moment.
They have this huge opportunity,
A chance to become a global leader.
but they also have these huge challenges.
Obstacles in their path.
And a lot of it comes down to the mining industry.
The foundation of it all.
Can they make it sustainable?
Environmentally and economically.
Can they become more self-reliant?
Less dependent on imports.
Those are the big questions.
Million-dollar questions.
So the big question remains, right?
Yeah.
Can India become a steel superpower while still protecting its environment?
And its resources.
It's a complex equation
It is.
with a lot of moving parts.
And the stakes are high.
It makes you think, beyond just India,
Right.
about how all the geopolitical stuff happening in the world
Yeah.
and how these global supply chains are changing.
It was all interconnected.
It could really impact India's plans.
In ways we can't even predict.
And who knows what other surprises are in store.
Yeah, there are always unforeseen factors.
This is definitely something we're going to keep a close eye on.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
And we'll keep you updated as it develops.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
See you then.